Hello everybody, my name is Jetsam Junk, aka Liz, and Liz is my real name. Jetsam Junk is my username. And there's this lovely story about the love between Gary, Oak, and Locke, whatever her last name is. It's called A Story of Love. And I'm about to read it to you so that you all know how it was meant to be enjoyed. Alright. Locke had just finished a battle with a trainer on the route back home. It was a pretty easy win. She had a pretty rad team after all. She was almost home and she was ready for a break. And just as she thought this, she saw a figure in the distance. As she got closer, she saw that it was Gary. "Gary, what are you doing here?" she said. Gary looked away, his face turning a rosy shade of pink. I just wanted to see you again. I mean, after all the horrible things I did, I needed to apologize, and tell you that, Gary said as he was interrupted by Locke. Apologize? Do you really think that I'd forgive you? Yelled Locke, a little upset at herself for yelling at him, because she was angry at him, but she still had unsettled feelings for him. I wasn't myself. It was like, I don't know. I just couldn't stop. But you have to know that, Gary said. Know what? That you ruined my life? Killed some of my closest friends? Yelled Locke. Gary grabs onto Locke's arms, and he tries to keep himself from screaming out his feelings. And he says, I was frustrated. I didn't understand what I was feeling. And this frustration messed me up. I don't know what it was, but, I do care about you. You need to know this. Locke pushes him away and walks into town. And as she does, she turns around and says with a pained look on her face, You care, huh? Yeah, well, frustrated or not, you have a funny way of showing it. I don't want to see you anytime soon. Just get out of my life already. Locke turns away quickly, her eyes watering, and she walks away without another word. Gary tries to call out to her, but no words come out. All he can do is stand there, angry at himself. 2 years later, Locke was just chilling with her team by the fire on a winter's day. The past few months were especially good. She had a trainer or two come by and search for a battle with Locke, who they heard so many rumors about. She had become rather well known after all. It was an hour or so before sunset when she heard a knock at her door. She wonders who it could be, considering there was a mild storm outside and it was too cold out to travel out to her town. When she opened the door, her jaw dropped, and she was filled with a rush of various emotions. Hello, Locke, It was Gary. What are you doing here? Locke said with a shaky voice. Gary looks into the house. He had traveled a long way to get to Locke's home, and he was caught in the storm before he could find a place to stay. His face was pale, with a tint of blue. Could I come in by any chance? He asked. Locke looks away for a moment, unsure if she should let him in. I suppose it'd be cruel to leave anyone out in this weather. Gary's face softens as he walks in. Locke shuts the door and holds onto the knob for a few seconds, thinking to herself, wondering why she let Gary into her home. She then takes a deep breath and asks, What are you doing here? Gary, now standing by the fireplace, sighs, as if trying to gather his strength. I know you might not believe what I'm about to say, but I've come here because I want to show you that I've changed. Changed? Really? I don't see you for 2 years and now you decide to suddenly come back to tell me this? Locke said with her fists clenching. She was upset at him. This was true, but she didn't understand what she was feeling. It wasn't exactly anger, but a mixture of sadness and disappointment. She thought about this until Gary, after a long pause, spoke. I couldn't force myself to come back to you any sooner because I wasn't, I was still confused. I still don't know why I did the things I did or acted out against you, but I think now I can at least have the strength to talk to you again. There was a long pause. Locke still standing by the door in her pajamas, and Gary just 10 feet away by the fireplace, still in his winter jacket and his scarf still covering the lower half of his face. Hey, you know that I run a gym now? I haven't lost a match since I opened it, said Gary, breaking the silence. Locke, clenching her fists, takes a few steps towards Gary. A gym? Is that really what you came to tell me? That you've changed and that you run a stupid gym? You have nothing else to say? Locke yelled. Gary, startled at her reaction, looks down at her with a pained expression on his face as he regrets saying something so suddenly. He thought to himself that he should just tell her what he's really feeling, what he really thinks about her, what's taken him 2 years to figure out. I just thought, ellipses. I mean, I know I told you to get out of my life, but, ellipses, I honestly thought you'd come back sooner. Telling me something like you wanting to start over, ellipses. Tell me that maybe, ellipses, maybe that... Locke stutters as she looks at him, her face now red and her eyes welling up. Gary's expression is suddenly more pained than before. He looks at Locke, unsure what to say. As she turns away from him, he pulls his scarf off, and it slips off onto the floor. Locke, ellipses. This may seem sudden for me to say, but, ellipses, and well, it may not mean much considering what I've done, and I don't expect you to forgive me either, but I still need you to know. Gary suddenly freezes, his words lost. Locke suddenly staring at him. He looks into her eyes and tries to find the right words. Locke, I really, ellipses, care about you. I will... Gary turns slightly, his face now glowing red. Spit it out, Gary. If you can't say a few words, then you can just go back into the storm. Get the professor to give you a place to stay, because right now you're wasting my time, Locke says sternly. She suddenly wonders why she's so upset. It's not for the things he's done, because she finds herself yearning for him to say whatever it is he's trying to say. She thinks how she wants him to say a few certain words. The moment those thoughts cross her mind, she tries to shake them off. What is she thinking? Does she want him to care about her? Does she actually want him in her house? Why was she so upset that he didn't try to come back to her sooner? She was so confused. Locke, ellipses, Gary says softly. Just spit it out, Locke says strongly and yet almost begging. Gary, a little startled, takes a deep breath. Locke, But then Spuds comes out of the other room! What is this, Locke? Why is he here? Spuds, what are you doing out here? I thought you guys had fallen asleep, Locke said with a slight shake in her voice. She wasn't quite sure what Spuds had just interrupted. Spuds glares at Gary. I was sleeping, but then I heard you yelling. None of the others woke up, but if you need them to, none of us would have a problem getting rid of him. Locke, a little shocked, unsure for a moment why Spuds is so aggressive. She gets a hold of herself and the mixed emotions she had before faded into the back of her head. She understands Spud's aggression. She has all the same anger, but she kept asking herself, why wasn't she acting like Spuds? Why wasn't she pushing Gary away too? Spuds looks at Locke, who is staring at the floor with an immensely confused look on her face. His face saddens. Locke, are you okay? His face goes from concern to anger as he turns to Gary and suddenly pushes him against the wall with his vines close to the fire. What did you do to her? What did you say to make her like this? Spuds yelled. He was filled with so much concern over Locke. He knew more than anyone how Gary affected Locke every time they fought. I didn't, ellipses, say, ellipses, anything, ellipses, yet, Gary says, choking, as Spuds pushes him higher. Spuds, return! Spuds turns swiftly in complete shock as he's forced into his Pokeball. Locke grasping the ball in complete shock of herself. She was scared of what Spuds was willing to do, what he may have done, ellipses, to Gary. She pulls the ball close to her chest, her breathing becoming harsh. She starts to cry. Gary, now on the floor holding onto his neck, looks over at Locke. He now wishes he never came. He's causing her too much pain. And all just to tell her how he feels? What does it matter how he feels? He should have just left her alone, and maybe their paths would never have crossed. Maybe he would have just held on to his feelings and kept them to himself and let Locke live, never knowing a difference in her life. Gary, unless you want me to release Spuds, tell me, why the hell are you here? Locke says sternly. Gary, now realizing how much he's dragged this out, says, Locke, I love you. There's a thick, dead silence as Locke drops Spud's ball to the floor. Her tears stop. She's in total shock. When did he come to feel this way, she asked herself. Locke, I used to admire you so much. You were such a good trainer and an even better person. Part of me was jealous and part of me was dumbfounded. And the part of me that was ruled by my pride, the part of me that was so upset that you were better than me, the part of me that wanted to prove myself to you, to my grandfather, to myself, to anyone, took control and forced all my logic and true feelings back. It wasn't until I realized how senseless my actions were and how I could have proved myself not by being your rival, but just by following the traitor's path. I could have learned so much from you. I could have been strong without having to defeat you. Gary pauses with an angered look on his face. I used to be mad at you, but now I'm only mad at myself. There's so much I should have done, ellipses, but there's nothing I can do to change any of it. Gary clenches his teeth as he's filled with hate towards himself. Locke looked shocked and yet sad. At first she thought she was pitying him, but then she realized she wished all the same things, wished that they could have been friends from the start, and maybe they could have become more. The moment that thought crossed her mind, her face went completely red. She took a step back. Gary looks up. His face changes. He's confused as he looks at Locke as she stares at him. The moment he makes eye contact, his face drops and his face becomes flustered. He wants to look away, but there was something keeping him from breaking eye contact. Locke, too, felt strange. She wanted to look away. She didn't want to have to look at him. But then a thought crossed her mind. She sees how submissive he's become, how much more timid his words are. This wasn't the same Gary who she fought years ago. He was different, and she found herself happy over the thought. She started to walk towards him slowly. As she drew nearer, Gary's head turned up, neither of them breaking eye contact. As Locke now stands in front of Gary, she bends down to her knees and meets him at eye level. Gary, ellipses, do you, ellipses, do you really mean what you said? Everything you said? She asks. Gary finds himself wrapped in her eyes. He starts to feel as if he's about to melt. Ellipses, Gary says before pausing into silence again. Tell me, Locke says, frustrated. Gary finds his body moving towards Locke. His arms reach towards her as he gently grabs her arms, slowly, and yet seeming as if in an instant, he pulls her towards him and hugs her, pushing his chest into hers, and his face nuzzles the back of her neck. I find myself thinking about you, ellipses, all the time. At first I thought it was from regret of how I treated you, ellipses. But then I realized that it was from feelings that I had pushed back, feelings that I was afraid to admit I had, ellipses. I love you, Locke, and if I could, I'd give up my life to take back everything I've done to you. Locke, with a sad expression on her face, hugs him tightly without saying a word. They hold each other tightly as the fire slowly burns out. I see what you're doing there.
We've been streaming it. They can hear you talk.
What?
Jetsam's a jerk.